who can't make it, and so I'm sure they'd like to watch it later. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Fellowship's Connected at Distance program. I am Marie Luna. I'm the Director of Congregational Life, and I'm really happy to be with you all via Zoom tonight. Someday we'll be back in person, but not today. And I'm thrilled that Hilary and Jake have said yes to meeting with us tonight, taking some time out of your very busy lives. Hilary has been a fellowship member for a long time. In fact, was one of the people that started up a Lawrence student group. I don't know how many years ago, Hilary, that was, but it goes back a little bit. And so I'm really thrilled to hear both of your stories, how you kind of got to this point in a very unique time in all of our lives. I do just want to make sure everyone knows that we have several adult Connected at Distance programs each week, and I will put in the chat box the list of them in case you're curious as to what's coming up. Tomorrow we have an author presentation on a brand new book called The Stonewall Generation, and I think it's going to be really great. We have lots of good things happening. So, but I am going to turn this over to Hilary and Jake. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. It's so good to see everybody. I've really missed being at the fellowship with you all every week. So this is a big treat. So Jake and I are really big fans of Krista Tippett's On Being podcast. And so I thought it might be a fun way to start our introductions with her traditional question of what is your religious or spiritual upbringing, and how does that kind of play into who you are today? So we're both going to answer that question to get us started, and then we'll see where that goes. And if you have questions about like that topic while we're talking, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll monitor that while we get started.
And in terms of a presentation,
we don't have any slides to share.
We're not going to go through a PowerPoint or anything. We're really just going to chat and look forward to an exchange with everybody as we go through the evening. And as Hilary said, just really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with all of you. So looking forward to it. You want to start with the first question?
Sure. So I am a UU who grew up UU. My parents are founding members of the Lake Country Unitarian Universalist Church, and that is where I grew up. I remember having my 4th birthday in our first rented space as a group of probably 15 families. And so we bounced around renting different Methodist church spaces for evening services, and you all know that kind of beginning story. But I grew up in that kind of trajectory of a church, and it was lay-led for my whole childhood and adolescence. They found a settled minister for the first time when I went to college. So leadership has always been a part of church for me, and I've always made really strong connections with others who are part of UU. And for me, like more spiritually, I really I connect with Buddhism and some aspects of Hinduism. Really more nature-centered practices. I meditate a lot, and so that's kind of a brief overview. I did, as Marie mentioned, when I was at Lawrence, I started the Lawrence University UU group, and we met with Roger every week, and bless his heart, we met on Friday afternoons, and then once that time didn't work, I proposed that we meet on Tuesday night starting at 9 p.m. and he said yes. And then our group grew from about 5 members every week to about 20. And so every week I was the center, the leader of those times together. And that was a really neat experience for me. And Jane drove me to the fellowship when I could make it.
So I grew up going to First Congregational UCC here in Appleton, and so that was and is my church. My mom worked there. She worked in what you'd call RE, and so was responsible for the children, youth, and family programming at First Congregational, and you know, that changed my relationship a little bit to the church, just in that my mom worked there, and so I had a different experience of being a member of the church. And I also worked at the church in college. I was a night watchman, so I would go from Lawrence every night at about 9:30. I'd go over to the church, and I'd do a walkthrough and make sure the building was all closed up and the lights were off. And that was a weird college job that I had. I have not been a regular churchgoer in the last few years, but I have, as Hilary has, we have worked on meditation and talking about spirituality and how that affects our lives. And the upbringing in a progressive Christian tradition was really influential for me in a lot of ways in terms of how I see the world and how I think about issues. The UCC is they call themselves the Church of the Open Door, and they really mean it in terms of being an inclusive space for people of all backgrounds. And so growing up in that faith tradition really normalized being present with difference. And that was a really important part of my upbringing, particularly when it came to LGBTQ inclusion and really sharing space and being inclusive. So that was First Congo was a huge part of that for me in my upbringing.
That's our dog, Ruby. She's
She's
joining the conversation.
Yes. Yeah. Very helpful. So yeah, I don't know where you want to go from here.
Well, Marie asked if we could talk a little bit about what we're doing now, what we're excited about in our roles, and how we got to those roles a little bit, right, Marie? So I'll go again.
Okay. All right.
Right. So I studied education and music and Spanish at Lawrence, and I have been working at North High School for the past 7 years as an ELL teacher, focused on working with newcomers and students with refugee backgrounds. And I'm also right now I'm working as an instructional coach. And that means that I get to go into all different kinds of classrooms at North, any content area, any grade, and I work with that teacher to help them improve their universal instruction. And that means that they are using practices and activities and strategies that all learners can access, so that the content that the students are learning is accessible to everybody. And that work really is, for me, founded in my faith and my practices as a UU. And it really comes, for me, it's part of living out what I believe in my work every day. And right now I get to take a break from North, and I'm attending a master's program at Harvard for the next year, focused on equity and inclusion in education. So I'm really excited for that next step. And I'm really fortunate to have been given the opportunities that I have at North High School. The teachers and staff there are really phenomenal. They work really hard. And I feel like there is a lot of momentum around culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. It's hard. It is not easy work. It's not easy for me to get all of my colleagues in a room to talk about bias and privilege and how white supremacy shows up in our schools. It's hard to do that, but people are coming to those conversations, and that's really encouraging.
So, so the question is how we got to where we are now, or what we're doing now. And I'll start with Hilary, because Hilary is a huge part of what got me to what I'm doing now. And so we met in college at Lawrence, and got to know each other working on student government legislation together. So the origins of romance in setting a student org policy in college, but that was where it got started for us. And we got married coming up on 4 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And we've been together since since I was a junior at Lawrence and you were a senior. And our relationship has been really important to me, just in terms of my own personal growth. Hilary challenges me to be a better person and a better leader, and really encourages me to think more broadly about the issues that we're dealing with. And that was true in my work at Lawrence, and it's certainly true now. So I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't start by talking about Hilary, because she's been such an influential part of my life, and also such an important part of my pursuit of what I'm doing now. In terms of thinking about running for office and getting involved in that, for me, that goes back just to growing up and being into working groups with people and working on solving problems. I've always really enjoyed deliberative bodies and rules of order and that sort of thing, like working in those structures. Before I get too far off of that, I think that the rules of order, when everybody understands them and is brought up to speed on what they mean, can be a really great tool for creating equitable dialogue. But that's a different, maybe Zoom call we could do sometime. But anyway, I've been really into this forever, working with people in groups and interested in leadership. And I've just been encouraged by the people who are around me to be in leadership roles. And so in my role at Lawrence, I had the opportunity, one of the things I did was manage the relationship between the university and the city of Appleton. And through that work, had the opportunity to meet people who work at the city and work on issues with the city of Appleton. And usually when I was getting involved with something between the university and the city, it was because maybe it was not going well or it was very complicated. But usually it was because it was kind of going sideways. And so I would get involved and try and work through the issues. And I got to see the kinds of people who work for the city and the issues that they work on, and also the opportunities that exist there to make change and to make that more accessible to more people in our community, the work of the city. And I got really excited about that possibility. So I learned as much as I possibly could, and this is something that I do always when I want to get involved in something. I learned as much as I possibly could about the work, and then ran. And as you all know, it was an unusual hiring process, a very public process, about 22,000 hiring managers, lots of interviews, media and things like that. But after I got through the hiring process, I've now joined the organization, and I've been in role now for a couple of months, and it's been an incredibly complicated time to step into a role like this. And I'm sure we'll get more into that as the conversation goes on, for both of us, just what we're doing these days, in these really complicated times we're in. lots and lots of fronts. But that's a little bit about how I got to be doing what I'm doing, and a little bit about where that comes from. I'm just reading these comments. Okay.
Yeah, we are a Parks and Rec couple. We laugh.
Yeah, definitely. Even still, it's still funny. Even though I'm working in municipal government now, Parks and Rec is still funny, if not funnier. So
I think we're on our third rerun of that show
so.
right now.
I think so. Yeah. So yes, absolutely.
And I love Nick too. Yeah.
Where next?
Where next? I thought it might be fun for you all to see like what we're reading right now, what's kind of keeping us going mentally. So I'll share 2 books, and Jake will share 2 books. My father gifted me this book. He's in a men's Zen group at LCUUC, and he shared this book with me at Christmas. It's called The Hidden Lamp, and it's a story of short koans, and koans are short stories from the Buddhist tradition. It's stories from 25 centuries of awakened women, and what I really love about it is it shares this koan, or this brief story that you have to work pretty hard to interpret, but then there's also somebody who is on the path who interprets the story, and it's all women's voices and all women's stories from all walks of life. And so reading those stories has kind of helped keep me grounded in this turbulence right now. And another book that I'm really looking forward to digging into is a book called There by Tommy Orange, and this is a new book. And this is a book that centers 12 stories of indigenous people around the country, but in modern day, and it kind of interweaves their stories and just shares that viewpoint. That's one area that I'm trying to beef up right now as far as my culturally and linguistically responsive teaching, and I'm really looking forward to reading that book. So.
I'll repeat the title of the first book.
The first book is called The Hidden Lamp. Oh yeah, I love Sherman Alexie.
So one of the books I'm reading right now is a book called Getting to Yes. This is a book on negotiation, and so much of my role is about negotiation. I mean, and if you think about it, all of our lives every day are about negotiation. We negotiate things constantly. We're negotiating things with our partners, our spouses, with children, and so much of our daily lives is made up in negotiation. But that's also particularly true for my work. So much of my work is about negotiation, and that's whether we're talking about real estate issues in the community, or we're talking about compensation, or every single day there are negotiations going on in my role. And I was really interested in this book because it tries to disrupt the sort of common way of negotiating, which is positional, which is basically sort of you stake a position and then you identify with that position. So your ego is connected to the position that you take in a negotiation, and that oftentimes that if you're arguing or you're negotiating from that perspective, it's not outcomes driven, and it's not looking for mutual benefit when you're negotiating. And I think that's a really important facet of doing the job that I have well, is looking for mutually beneficial outcomes for people when we're working through issues, whatever those issues may be. So it's a really interesting book, and as I get through, I haven't read it. I am reading it, so stay tuned, I guess. And I highly recommend it, and the authors recommend it too. They say at the beginning, well, if everybody reads this book, won't that be a problem? If you're trying to have an edge in negotiations. And they say, no, actually, it would be better if everybody read this book and we're aware of these negotiating tactics because they are mutually beneficial and can lead to better outcomes. So that's one. The other one is just for fun because I need some fun things to read, just because everything's pretty heavy duty. And so I've got this book that I'm reading right now called The Philosophy of Sailing. And this is by Christian Williams. Oh, I realized I didn't give you the authors for getting to yes. That's Roger Fisher and William Ury. And this is from the Harvard Negotiation Project. So anyway, back to the fun book that I'm reading, Christian Williams, Philosophy of Sailing, Offshore in Search of the Universe. And it is a really interesting book. We like to sail. We have a little boat we keep on Lake Winnebago, and that's kind of a joint pursuit of ours and a way for us to unplug and get out and on the water. Our boat is called Bobby McGee, named for the song.
One of the songs that I like to sing if we're out doing karaoke.
Yeah, the Janis Joplin version.
No, of course.
So anyway, this book is just fun. He took a trip, a solo sailing trip from Los Angeles to Hawaii. He used to work in newspapers, and he's sort of touching on philosophy as he goes along. It's just like indulgent and not at all particularly useful for anything, but fun. So that's another one that I'm reading. And then we have a few magazine subscriptions that we try and keep up with. So yeah. That's a little about what we're reading. Question about
when are we having
mayor karaoke? Okay, we'll have to talk about that. That'll probably have to go through a long committee process for years and years.
Or we can try to figure out how to do that virtually, and that would be pretty fun too.
So, where to?
What is something that you are looking forward to or excited about in your work right now?
What am I excited about? There's a lot of stuff that I'm really excited about, in spite of what's going on. One of the things I'm excited about is we're in the hiring process right now for a new communications specialist in my office, and I'm really, really excited about the possibilities for getting new energy in that role and a new perspective. And we just went through a couple of interviews, a couple of days of interviews, and just I'm really grateful that people, first of all, that anybody applied. I think when anybody applies for a role, it's a place of vulnerability, and I just really appreciate that people are interested in serving our community and being a part of what we're doing. So I'm excited about the possibilities for that position and what we can do. I'm really excited about the little things that we're getting done. It's crazy that they feel like little things, but we're getting really good work done, like boundary agreements with neighboring communities that have been kind of hanging out there for years, and cleaning up some of our municipal boundaries, securing easements for critical infrastructure. We're doing things that, they're kind of happening, they're flying under the radar, but we're getting really significant work done. And I'm excited about that in terms of and I'm looking forward to more of that. And I am also looking forward to a time when we can get back to connecting with people in person, and being in groups together out in the community. That is such a critical component of certainly the work of the mayor, is being out and connected with people. And I really feel like that's a missing piece right now in terms of my sense of what's going on in the community, how people are feeling about issues, what is going on for people in their daily lives. It's hard to stay connected with that through digital means. And so we're trying to find ways to do that, but I'm so looking forward to being back in that space where we're able to spend time together and gather and celebrate. And so Rana's just asking, open meetings. Absolutely. We'll be holding open meetings. We're actually working on an open office hours format that's safe for us to do even with COVID going on, thinking about how to facilitate open office hours and things like that. Other ways of connecting with the community and keeping people informed, and also keeping myself informed, hearing from people. So yeah, there'll be cookies. I don't know if there'll be cookies during COVID. That may be another casualty of COVID. They'll be individually wrapped, but anyway, those are a few things I'm looking forward to. What are you looking forward to?
Well, Penny has her hand up. So,
oh, okay.
Penny, what's your question?
Well, I can only imagine all the challenges you've faced with this kind of perfect storm from practically day one, COVID, shutting down of workplaces, and protests weekly, if not more often. So, I mean, I admire anyone who could deal with all of that. I do have one question. I heard that the police chief was going to create a volunteer advisory board.
Yeah.
And I also heard from Black Lives United that they would be more in favor of an independent civilian review board rather than just an advisory board to the police chief. So would you be open to something that had a little more teeth?
So in the state of Wisconsin, so yes, it's true, there is an advisory board, and this is something that Chief Thomas and I have talked about and that we've been working on. And this is a really important structure for the chief to gather input from our community, to create another touch point for people to get involved and to have their voices heard, and on a recurring basis. One of the things, before I get off of this, one of the things that I'm mindful of and that I'm trying to work on as a municipality is finding more ways and creating more ways for people to get involved in the work of the city, to have more opportunities for appointments to boards and commissions and things like that, recognizing that running for office, you know, a lot of times people say, well, if you care about that, why don't you run for office? I'll just run for office. And the thing is, running for office still requires, and particularly in this community, requires a great deal of privilege. And I think it's important that we recognize that. I had incredible privilege to be able to run for office. And I mean, I had a job that supported me and that allowed me to reduce my hours. Lawrence, I reduced my hours at Lawrence, changed my responsibilities. That's incredible privilege. I'm the fourth generation in my family to live in this community. I'm white, I'm straight, I'm male. You know, so layers and layers of privilege to run for office in this community. And so I'm thinking about that in terms of our work as a municipality and how we create more touch points and opportunities for people to get involved. And so I think that having structures like this advisory board are really important in terms of creating more opportunities for people to get involved. In terms of review boards, I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that Wisconsin is a little bit different than other states in terms of how law enforcement and fire departments are managed. We have an independent police and fire commission in the state of Wisconsin by statute. And so the police and fire commission is made up of citizens. It is separate from the political process. So they're appointed by the mayor, but it's not managed by the mayor. And the Police and Fire Commission is an important part of this process in terms of reviewing policies and procedures, and also carrying out disciplinary proceedings in cases where, for example, excessive use of force has presented itself, or there are other issues with members of the department. And I think there's a lot of untapped potential for a lot of communities and how they leverage the police and fire commission structure to more effectively manage their law enforcement agencies. Our situation in Appleton is a little bit different in terms of the work that our police and fire commission has done over the years, and also in the types of policies and procedures that our police department has implemented. And I say that just to provide some context, not to say we don't have work to do, because in the city of Appleton, I've gotten a lot of messages from members of the community about programs like 8 Can't Wait, or social media campaigns like 8 Can't Wait, and other policies and procedures, things like banning chokeholds and these kinds of policy changes. Well, these are policies. Many of these are policies that the city of Appleton, our police department, has had for years, if not decades. And so I think as we look at, as a community, how we're meeting needs or how we're not meeting needs, how we're serving our citizens well, our residents well or not, we need to gather input from people in our community before we set off in that work. And that is why I think starting with the creation of this advisory board is an important step to create that kind of mechanism for people to weigh in real ways on policies and procedures, and also to independently gather feedback. The chief is not involved in the selection process for this advisory board. I'm making the selections for the advisory board, and that was at his request, so that there is independence from the group in terms of who's appointed to serve. And as we get deeper into this work, then I think questions about I think you used the term teeth, questions about the mechanisms that we use as a community to make change. Those are going to become a little bit clearer, and we'll have to address those when we arrive there. But I've also really been focused on, I'm sorry to go on and on, but this is so important, and I just want to give as full an answer as I can here. I think it's really important that we work with, certainly in the city of Appleton, that we work with law enforcement to think about the challenges that we're discussing, because many of the conversations in this country right now are about this notion of defunding police, which is at a deeper level a conversation about asking questions about what we task law enforcement with responding to in our communities. And I think it would be a huge mistake for us here in Appleton. It's different in other communities. There are other communities where this kind of relationship isn't maybe possible, or the conditions haven't been set for it. But I think it would be a mistake for us to not work in partnership with law enforcement to get at some of these questions and think about the structural issues at play as we move forward, because they're aware of the calls that they respond to and the issues that they deal with, perhaps better than anybody. And I think we would be missing out on a lot of subject area knowledge if it were an adversarial process rather than one of partnership and collaboration. So that's kind of a broad overview of the question, but just wanted to answer a little bit more fully. So a lot more work to do on this front. And I would just say that our work is maybe starting in a slightly different place in the city of Appleton than it is in other communities, but that's not to say that we don't have work to do. I just want to underline that point. We know we have work to do in the city of Appleton, and we're going to continue to do that.
Do you want to do this one, or should we, Scott, is your question in that same vein?
It's a little bit in the same vein.
Okay. So we'll go Scott,
so, yeah.
And we'll do Kramer's, the Tarnowski family question. If you want to you can keep adding your questions into the chat, and then we can address them. I think that's working pretty well. Go, Scott.
Okay. So my thought is, I think some people like Brett Favre, for example, and other people are coming out and and saying a lot of positive things about diversity now. So I think people are being skeptical of intentions, and everybody's trying to get on the right side if they were not on the right side. But you got elected, and Hilary, you've always supported diversity and inclusion. So my question for Jake is, as you took office before the whole George Floyd debacle, were there some specific diversity ideas you and Karen Nelson talked about in those early days, or something you'd like to get started that hasn't kicked in yet? To I think Appleton's already a pretty unified city in terms of that, but is there an idea that you have or something that you'd like to get started on that in that
Sure, Scott.
area?
Yeah, I mean, I talked in the campaign about emphasizing the importance of making sure Appleton is a welcoming community. And an important facet of that work, just in terms of our work in city government, is making sure that our policies and procedures are set up to treat people equitably when they engage with the city in one way or another. And that is work that will continue. That's been work that's been underway at the city of Appleton since before I started, but that will continue, and with greater emphasis as we move forward. And that's taking opportunities whenever we're looking at policies, no matter what part of the organization, to think about whether we're meeting people where they are, and addressing the needs of people in our community, no matter where they're coming from or what their perspectives are. So that's an important part of the work, and that's work that's really happening. It hasn't been delayed at all. It's really just that we're continuing that work. And right now, we're having conversations as a community, as we are as a country, about how we respond to issues in our community. I see that very much connected to this broader conversation about how we treat people, and whether our policies and procedures are set up to treat people equitably. But this is everything from our hiring processes and to permitting and so on. So that's a piece of work that will continue, and it's absolutely something that I've been committed to since long before I ran for office or got into this role. So I'm with you, Scott. There's a lot of people who all of a sudden are touting their allyship, and this is the first time they're showing up to the conversation, and that I do think that we should celebrate that, and I do too. And I think we should recognize, and I think we should recognize the moment that we're in as an opportunity to make real and lasting change. And even though it, in this case, has a tragic impetus, it's an impetus nonetheless, and we should take advantage of it to make real systemic change. So there was another question about police and schools. If it's okay, I don't want to spend all of our time on law enforcement and policy. I mean, we can if you'd like, but I also want to make sure that we're spending some time talking about things that are going on in Hilary's work, which is really important. And so I just want to raise that as we move forward. But I'm happy to answer the question about police and schools. Again, this is a conversation that we need to have in partnership with the school district and with the police department to understand the underlying goals of that program, to assess whether those underlying goals are being met, and to think about changes, if changes are required, what those would look like in order to meet the underlying goals. But I would say that, like so many things, there are areas of value in the school resource officer program, and those areas of value play out long after students leave the school system. And I saw that when I participated in a ride along with the police department over the winter, which was that I was down on College Avenue during the night shift, and it was a Saturday night, and the people kept coming up to the officers I was walking with and having conversations with them like they were old friends, and sharing information with them and saying, hey, this person looks like they might need some help, and or they might be in trouble. That kind of conversation and exchange. And I said, what's going on here? How do you know all these people? He said, well, I was a school resource officer, and many of these people who are coming up, and they're now they're adults. Some of them have their own kids now. They were students in the school I was working in, and so that's how I know them. And those relationships are lasting. The positive ones are lasting, and so I just, for me, that was a different kind of exposure to one area of value in that program in terms of its potential for community, what's referred to as community policing, which is the idea of humanizing both the members of the community and also the people we ask to enforce our laws. And so it was a really interesting experience. But again, we know that there's work to be done, and conversations to be had. I have a conversation coming up with Superintendent Baseman on this subject, and so more work to be done on that front. But I think it's important that we think about these issues at the Appleton level as we're working on it, because there are differences from community to community in terms of the success or failure of these various programs or the issues that are presenting. So I think that we got down this path, but the question was, what am I excited about in the work that I was doing? So I want to ask you, Hilary, what are you excited about in the work you're doing?
I am right now. I've been really encouraged, I think, like I mentioned before, by the staff members that I have been working with, and seeing that they are really willing and ready to make changes in their instruction and how they create safe and welcoming environments for all students. And I was having a conversation with a teacher that I coached 3 years ago now, and he is on a completely different path instructionally with the kinds of things that he does with assessments and with reflection and metacognition with his students. And I know those are like real kind of in-depth teacher terms, but I'm kind of in the weeds right now with grad school. But seeing that the things that I'm working on to help make our schools more safe and welcoming and accessible to all students, seeing that being sustaining, that's really exciting. And so the potential to do more of that, that's great for me. And Rana, you kind of pointed to something that I'm really interested in. She said, we need more guidance counselors and social workers in the schools, 100%. And those are policy things, right? But that's also funding, which is state driven. And so I'm really hoping to just learn more about different funding models that schools are using. In Appleton, we're doing partial equity modeling, and I don't quite understand why. I haven't really gotten a strong answer about that. And so I'm excited to see what my colleagues do, 3 or 4 years after I've coached them, because I get to walk back into their classrooms and see an activity that grew out of something that grew out of a discussion that we had, and all of the students are engaged and doing math, and that's that we need that. We need that everywhere. We need that K-12. So yeah, after this year, I will come back to North. I will come back to my instructional coaching position, and that's definitely the plan. So yeah.
Yeah. So what else?
Well, those were kind of the things that I had covered. Marie, do you have any other guiding questions? Are there people who do that work in other schools? Yes, with varied success. There are a lot of literacy coaches who have way too many hats, and so their focus is not on instruction, and they're oftentimes being asked to create systems that there isn't time or room for to help grow student achievement, specifically in reading and literacy. So yes, we have literacy coaches. There are 3 other full-time EL coaches. But like I said, North is a really special building. The staff culture there is one of definitely a growth mindset and openness. And that isn't widely true as far as instructional practices from the experiences of the other coaches. But this is the coaching model is definitely something that Superintendent Baseman has talked about. And I think an area that most of our schools is working on right now, and Dan can speak to this too, is that our district is working with a company called Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Teaching. And those practices, I think, are getting to most educators. And that's really good work that's being done. So each school does it a little bit differently. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the speech pathologists have been engaged in that work for a couple of years now. Kathy Miller, who just retired at North, she was really excited about what they're getting into. Está muy bien. Hablo español casi cada día. How good is my Spanish was the question.
Ay, muy bien, me alegro mucho de oírte hablar así. Qué bien.
Sí, debemos charlar.
Sí, sin duda, estuve en España 15 años.
Oh, excelente.
Muy bien, encantada, gracias.
That's one of my, I'm the Latinx Club advisor at North.
Awesome. This has been wonderful. I love that you started with Krista Tippett questions. I love her as well. Thank you for sharing of yourselves. We do have some more time. We have about 10 more minutes. Do people have other questions that they have for Hilary or Jake, or both? I'm sad we lost Karen and Helene, because I know that Karen's kids had some questions for you, some hard-hitting ones, in fact, but they seem to not be here anymore.
Please don't be shy.
Hilary, I know one of the things that you do is you work with some of the refugee population, and obviously we at the fellowship work in different types of immigration justice, not necessarily with refugees, but with asylum seekers and other undocumented people. Do you have any information that you think that we should be aware of about our city?
I think something that most of us have probably been in conversation about is just the need for affordable housing. Housing is one of the biggest challenges that our families with refugee backgrounds face because of the length of the process to go from immigrant with a green card to full citizenship and the way that credit works. It's really, really difficult to find positive housing. There are some amazing there are some really amazing landlords, and then there are some companies that don't do right by our clients. And that's a pretty big one. The other one is transportation. Most of our high school students are the ones to first start driving, and getting their license is a huge hump because they have to pass the driver's test. And even though they may have an interpreter with them, it's hard to learn all of those rules when coming from a country with maybe they didn't drive before, or maybe they drove and didn't have to pay attention to it. So driving is definitely a big barrier to being able to thrive here. Some of the things that they always talk about loving is just they like to talk to people no matter what their level of English is. Once they get into conversation with somebody, oftentimes that somebody can't stop talking to them, and that's great. So I would say, even if you feel like you don't know if they understand you, I promise they understand more than they're letting on, or more than they're able to say back to you. But they love to share their stories. I think that the communal culture that especially our refugees from Uganda, Rwanda, and Congo are coming from, the way that they think and they communicate in a communal sense is something that we can really learn as a society, and how to lift everybody up, and be less self-centric. That's something that these students bring into the classroom, and it creates wonderful opportunities for learning for all of the students.
I love that. You got a whole bunch of questions in the chat now.
Yeah, good. Okay. So there was a question about overlap between being a UU and growing up UCC. So we've talked a little bit about that. I don't know, what's your perspective?
So what are some of the overlaps? I think open-mindedness is a big overlap. I know that's a pretty general term, but being open and accepting to the person who walks through the door, that's not something that's everywhere. And that's something that's definitely an overlap. I think also, like, I spend a lot of time I have in the past, not recently, but with Jake's grandma. I go to church with her, and she'll come to the fellowship with me, and we love to talk about what we think and what our philosophies are. And so that curiosity and that search, that's definitely there as a core that overlaps. And service is another huge overlap for us. Jake and I talked, when we were first getting to know each other, we really spent time talking about our service experiences and how those experiences in our separate faith traditions really grounded us in what it means to be part of a community and what it means to support others.
Mm-hmm. Ditto.
What are we listening to?
Ooh. So these days I'm pretty reliant on Spotify just to like feed me things. And sometimes the algorithm gets a little bit weird. So for those of you who don't use Spotify, they will curate a list of new music that you might like based on whatever you've listened to over the last week or whatever. But sometimes it gets a little bit skewed because in the house, it's all running through the same system. So sometimes it's music that Hilary requests or music that we play for the pets. So we get some pretty out there suggestions from Spotify. But let's see. I've been listening to, there's this great song by a group named Sir Woman, and they've got, I think, just a couple of singles out, and those are really good.
I've been listening to a lot of First Aid Kit lately.
Mm-hmm. Andy Schauf, John Prine.
Aaron Ellen Kine is one of my favorites.
We're all over the place in terms of the kind of music we listen to, but
Brittany Howard.
Folk, blues, rock.
We love the Wood Brothers.
The Wood Brothers, folk Americana, that kind of stuff. But we're pretty all over the place. I was happy to speak at the rally on that Monday night. I thought that was there's a moment for that, and it was not in the first 2 days. The first 2 days were really about creating space for people to express how they were feeling, and we worked really hard at that in Appleton to create that space and stay back. And I think you can see if you were there or watching from afar that we had a far different result in the city of Appleton than many communities where people gathering in peace were met with violence. That was not our approach here, and that was intentional. Let's see. School's opening in the fall.
I know that they're looking at all models right now.
And I think this is actually a good place to point out an interesting thing, which is the city of Appleton and the school district are separate tax entities, so they don't fall under the school district is not managed in any way by the mayor or the common council. So that's an important, I think, distinction. They're independently managed by the board. If you've got any insight on what the school district's going to do, then let us know. We're curious too. Congo.
Well, of course they sent out a survey. I'm glad that it was reaching you, Marie. Yeah, they really are. I was just talking with Amy Swick, who's the EL coordinator, and they're looking at all models and will make decisions to create the best, they'll try to make decisions to create the best environment for all students. But I've heard everything from, they're trying to figure out if we need to stay distance, what do we need? If we can come back for asynchronous and synchronous, how is that going to look? How can we, is it possible that EL students and special ed students can come back into the building for more synchronous learning than other students? They're looking at all sorts of things right now.
And I'll just, on this point, I mean, so many organizations are in this conversation right now. It's certainly true for the city of Appleton as we're thinking about bringing our workforce back into their regular working spaces. I'm mindful not to say reopening or sort of returning to work, because we've been working through distance work or remote work all the way along. But we're going to be at this for a while as a community, and we're gonna continue to have to make hard decisions and personal sacrifices if we're gonna manage this pandemic effectively and keep our community safe. And so I just encourage everybody to give each other grace and to be patient with one another. That's something that we've been working really hard at, both just in our own relationship and in life together, but also with the communities that we're involved with, giving grace and understanding to the people we're interacting with, recognizing that as a community and as individuals, we're under stresses that we've never experienced before, and that our reactions that might seem out of character make a lot of sense in this context. So I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to gather with you all tonight, because these are the ways that we're getting by and staying connected and in touch with each other as a community. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I know we both appreciate the opportunity, and it's been really good to see you all and to hear from you or to read your messages. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And as citizens of Appleton, is there a good way to contact you in the future with questions?
Yeah, so my email address is mayor@appleton.org. And I know a few of you have messaged me there, but please feel free to do that. And, to call, if you'd like, call my office. And we'll do our best to get back to you, or to have a member of the staff get back to you if your question is a subject area question. But happy to hear from folks, and there'll be more opportunities moving forward to get together and spend time in exchange, talking and listening. But in the meantime, please reach out.
Marie, thank you so much for organizing.
Absolutely. Thrilled to be here with you all.
All right. I hope you all have a good night.